The key question is, what caused friction between Cavour and Garibaldi? At the end of the Roman Republic, Garibaldi had escaped to Genoa, where he was arrested. He was freed on the condition he left, and so he set sail for North America. It seemed like his legend was finished. In the United States, Garibaldi found what employment he could, eventually going back to sea as a master of ship traveling between the United States and China until he inherited some money from his brother. He used this to buy half of a small island off of Caprera, off the coast of Sardinia. There he took up farming, but was able to keep in touch with events in Italy through the National Society, which was working for the unification of Italy not as a republic, but as a monarchy under the leadership of the King of Piedmont. In the 10 years since Garibaldi had left Italy, there had been many changes. The situation in Piedmont itself was greatly altered. Charles Albert had been succeeded by his son, Victor Emmanuel II, who was pleasant, easygoing, and rather lazy, not unlike Garibaldi in his down-to-earth, honest approach and somewhat uncultivated manners. He was, however, much more politically able than he appeared, and managed somehow to keep on good terms with both Cavour and Garibaldi. He inspired great loyalty from Garibaldi, though without returning it. Victor Emmanuel II was now king of all of northern Italy except for Venetia, but as part of the agreement with Napoleon for French support during the war, Nice and Savoy had to be ceded to France, and handing over Nice, the city of his birth, was a bitter blow to Garibaldi, who now decided that Cavour was a low intriguer. A crisis point had been reached. In April 1860, a revolt started in Palermo in Sicily against the King of Naples. It was almost certainly organized by followers of Mazzini, who urged Garibaldi to take his men to the island, and it was supported by the National Society with its contacts throughout Italy. At the time, Garibaldi was working on an armed expedition to recover Nice from France. This would include blowing up ballot boxes to be used by those voting on whether Nice should remain Italian or again become French. He was, fortunately for the cause of Italian unity, diverted from this plan by news of the revolt in Sicily. Garibaldi began to collect more volunteers, and by early May 1860 had a force of about 1,200, mostly very young men who were known as the Thousand. He also had with him his current mistress and 1,000 rifles, but no ammunition, and they were aboard 2 old paddle steamers in the port of Genoa, ready to sail in the name of Italy and Victor Emmanuel. Common sense suggested to the Piedmontese Prime Minister, Count Cavour, that the expedition was unlikely to succeed. It had been put together too quickly, the number of men was too small, and their resources too poor, while it was known that the enemy forces were much larger. It was also known that previous expeditions of this kind had failed. Garibaldi might be a brilliant leader of men, but he had no understanding of military tactics. Cavour, therefore, was far from convinced that the expedition would succeed, nor was he sure it was a good idea. In his opinion, Sicily, like the rest of the South, was too poor and backward to be ready for a takeover by Piedmont. He therefore refused Garibaldi's request for arms and ammunition for the expedition, and made it clear that it went without Piedmontese official support. Some later reports suggested that Cavour tried to persuade Victor Emmanuel to arrest Garibaldi, but it was too late. The expedition had sailed on May 5th. In a note to his confidential agent in Paris, Cavour made it clear that he had made every effort to persuade Garibaldi to drop his mad scheme, but could not stop him from going, for force would have been necessary, which would have led to immense unpopularity had Garibaldi been prevented. In the end, he comforted himself with the idea that if the expedition failed, he would be rid of Garibaldi, a troublesome fellow, and if it succeeded, Italy would get some benefit from it. Garibaldi reached Marsala in Sicily on May 11th. He was lucky to be allowed to land. His two steamers arrived alongside a detachment of Britain's navy, and the local commander quite wrongly thought Garibaldi was under British protection, so refrained from attacking, whereas in reality there was no connection at all. Garibaldi benefited from this happy accident. One of his men was wounded in the shoulder and one dog in the leg. It was an auspicious start. From Marsala, the red shirts advanced on Palermo, the island capital, gathering support on the way and defeating the Neapolitan army in hand-to-hand fighting. In pouring rain, the Thousand, now numbering near 3,000, reached Palermo at the end of May and found 20,000 enemy troops waiting for them. One of the Thousand described the battle for Palermo. He wrote this: "There was no sign of any local uprising until quite late in the day. We were on our own, 800 of us at most, spread out over an area as large as Milan. It was impossible to expect any planning, let alone any orders. But somehow we managed to take the city against 25,000 well-armed and well-mounted regular soldiers. We were real ragamuffins. We ran in ones and twos through the alleys and squares, chasing Neapolitans and trying to stir up the people of Palermo. The Neapolitans were too busy running away, and the people of Palermo in taking refuge from the gunfire. When Palermo finally fell, it was all our doing, ours alone. Garibaldi showed the height of courage, and we too were heroes, just because we believed in what was impossible." Garibaldi quickly took possession of Palermo. The garrison withdrew to Naples, and the island of Sicily was his. His success outside Palermo was helped by the fact that an earlier revolt had left much of the island in a state of chaos, with bands of peasants roaming about looking for revenge against Neapolitan troops and oppressive landlords. Therefore, the speed of Garibaldi's success was partly due to his dashing and bold style of leadership, and partly due to the caution of Neapolitan officers worried about possible ambushes of their men by Sicilian bandits and dispossessed peasants. Garibaldi appointed himself as dictator of Sicily, and at first was sympathetic to the aims of the peasant revolt. He abolished the tax collected on corn being milled into flour, which was a standing grievance of the peasants, and won their support by promising a redistribution of land. Soon, however, he changed sides and suppressed a number of new peasant revolts. Though he lost the support of the peasants, but won that of the landlords, whose help he needed to restore law and order. He needed peace and stability in the island in order to be able to use Sicily as a jumping-off ground for an attack on the mainland of Italy and the next stage of unification. His obsession with a united Italy had led him to betray Mazzini's teachings about the importance of supporting the underprivileged. As part of the Law and Order campaign, Garibaldi introduced Piedmontese laws into Sicily as a preparation for annexation by Piedmont, but for the moment he refused to hand over Sicily to Victor Emmanuel. He was afraid that if he did so, Cavour would stop him using Sicily as a base for the campaign against Naples. Cavour was undoubtedly surprised at Garibaldi's success in Sicily and probably displeased at the public acclaim. Garibaldi was too much in the limelight and likely to take too much of the credit for himself for uniting Italy if he was allowed to continue unchecked. Cavour would have preferred things done more quietly, more constitutionally, and with credit going to Piedmont, Victor Emmanuel, and himself. Cavour was correct in his assumption that Garibaldi would next attempt to take Naples and then move northwards. But what could he do to prevent him? He tried to arrange a revolution in Naples in favor of Victor Emmanuel, but this failed. Then he gave orders to stop Garibaldi and his men from crossing the Straits of Messina to the mainland, but Garibaldi was too quick for him. Dodging the ships sent to stop him, he ferried his men across the straits to Calabria on August 22nd. Then, although heavily outnumbered, Garibaldi fought his way north towards the city of Naples. When he heard that the King of Naples had left the city, he accepted its surrender, arriving there in advance of his troops by train, almost alone, in early September. For the next 2 months, Garibaldi ruled as dictator over the Kingdom of Naples, unable to advance any further because the way was barred by a Neapolitan military stronghold in the north. Nevertheless, Garibaldi's plan was, as soon as possible, to move northwards to the Papal States and then to Rome, and so complete the geographical unification of Italy. The fact that he was delayed in Naples gave Cavour time to act. Historians are uncertain about Cavour's precise motives at this stage, but he clearly did not much like what Garibaldi had been doing in Sicily and Naples, and feared that an attack on Rome, such as Garibaldi intended, would lead to difficulties, especially with France. Napoleon III was already upset because 2 months earlier on his way south, Garibaldi had landed a small force in the Papal States. That expedition fizzled out, but the warning of more to come was clear. The danger was that France and the rest of Catholic Europe would act if the Pope or the city of Rome were threatened. Cavour was aware that many of the men who had joined Garibaldi were followers of Mazzini. This meant that they were opposed to the Church and its teachings, and would be only too glad to join in an attack on Rome. There was also Republicans, and this posed another threat. If they won control, the whole nationalist leadership might slip away from Piedmont and Victor Emmanuel, and become again Republican and revolutionary. Cavour and Victor Emmanuel must have had some doubt about whether even Garibaldi could maintain control over such a large army of irregular soldiers and enforce them obedience to the cause he said he was supporting. Cavour's most pressing need was to stop Garibaldi from attacking Rome. The only way to do this was to send an army from Piedmont through the Papal States to meet him before he could reach the city of Rome. The Pope had no wish to see either the Garibaldi or Piedmontese troops in his territory, but Cavour acted anyways, using the excuse that the Pope was unable to deal with the threat of revolt in his territory. The Piedmontese army, with Victor Emmanuel at its head, marched through the Papal States. They defeated a papal army on the way, and any civilians resisting the invasion were shot as traitors to the cause of a united Italy. In October, the Piedmontese army reached Neapolitan territory, and Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel met on October 26th in what might have been a highly tense scene. But Garibaldi had no intention of doing other than prove himself a loyal subject. With a flourish of his broad-brimmed hat, he saluted Victor Emmanuel as the first king of Italy, and agreed that the territory he had taken should be handed over to the king. In the ballots that were soon held in Sicily, Naples, Umbria, and the Papal Marches, there was an overwhelming wish for annexation by Piedmont. Nationalist feelings were running high after all the drama of the summer, and there seemed no real alternative now that the previous rulers were no longer in place. On November 7th, Victor Emmanuel and Garibaldi rode together in triumphal state entry into Naples. On the day after the state entry into Naples, Garibaldi officially handed over all of his conquests to Victor Emmanuel, who, in return, offered him the rank of Major General, the title of Prince, a large pension, and even a castle. Garibaldi refused them all. Garibaldi retired to his island off Sardinia with a year's supply of macaroni and very little else. Both Victor Emmanuel and Cavour were determined that Garibaldi should leave active political life. As far as they were concerned, his job was done. All Italy except for Rome and Venetia had been united under Victor Emmanuel, and the Constitution of Piedmont had been extended to the whole of the new Kingdom of Italy. If Garibaldi remained politically active, he was likely to cause trouble. Garibaldi, however, did not agree that his work was finished. He had his eye fixed firmly on Rome as a future target.